A little girl is handed pills so she can work longer. A Disney boy who once sounded immortal dies unidentified. A television icon becomes famous in a body altered by illness. A smiling child star goes in for ordinary treatment and never comes home. Another seems to have the flu, then dies from a condition hidden since birth. These faces sold comfort, innocence, and joy. What audiences never saw was damage waiting behind the image. Before we begin, comment where you're watching from and what time it is right now. Judy Garland. For millions of people, she was the bright face at the end of the yellow brick road, the girl with the voice that made Over the Rainbow feel like pure hope. MGM signed her as a teenager, turned her into one of its most valuable young stars, and built an image of innocence, discipline, and wonder around her. But that image came with brutal pressure. Garland later said she was given stimulants to keep working and sleeping pills to bring her back down. While the studio also pushed harsh dieting and relentless schedules, the public saw a miracle. Real life was a child being managed like a machine. Then the damage followed her into adulthood. Her career remained extraordinary, but so did the instability around it. Exhaustion, dependence on prescription drugs, emotional strain, and a body worn down by years of survival under pressure. In 1969, Garland was found dead in London at 47. The coroner ruled it an accidental barbiturate overdose, not suicide. That official distinction matters. So does the larger tragedy. The girl who sang about Somewhere Over the Rainbow spent much of her real life fighting to get through the next day. Hollywood loved the image she created. It did not save the child inside it. She had even received a Juvenile Academy Award before adulthood. Bobby Driscoll. He was also one of Disney's first great child stars, winning a special Academy Award after films like So Dear to My Heart and The Window, then becoming the voice and visual model for the boy who would never grow up. That is the image people remember. Bright eyes, adventure, permanent youth. But Disney moved on, and Bobby did not stay frozen in that protected version of childhood. As he got older, roles dried up. He later spoke about being rejected by other kids, slipping into drug use as a teenager, and feeling shut out after fame had already defined him. The irony is vicious. The boy linked to eternal youth entered adulthood with almost none of its safety. In 1968, he died in New York at 31. A post-mortem found heart failure associated with advanced atherosclerosis linked to drug use. He carried no identification, and his body was buried in an unmarked grave on Hart Island before his family learned what had happened. That ending is almost too cruel to process. Peter Pan stayed famous. Bobby Driscoll did not. The child Disney sold to the world was remembered. The man was nearly lost. He had also won a special juvenile Oscar at the height of that success. Gary Coleman. On Different Strokes, his timing stare and What You Talkin' About Willis made him one of the most recognizable child stars in America. But Gary's fame was tied to a condition that was hurting him long before viewers understood it. He was born with a congenital kidney disorder, underwent major treatment from childhood, and the illness affected his growth, helping preserve the small, youthful appearance that made him instantly marketable on screen. That was the public version. The private truth was darker. The body that made him look unforgettable also trapped him inside an image he could not outgrow. He endured dialysis transplants, financial battles with his parents and advisors, and years of conflict over money earned during the height of his fame. Even as an adult, he was still being treated like the child the audience remembered. In 2010, Coleman died at 42 after suffering an intracranial hemorrhage following a fall. By then, his life had become a mix of health struggle, lost earnings, legal trouble, and public misunderstanding. His illness did not just shape his body. It helped shape the role the world kept forcing him to play. 2 kidney transplants came before he was even out of his teens. Annette Funicello. On the Mickey Mouse Club and later in the Beach Party films, she radiated the kind of cheerful, all-American brightness that made audiences feel young just watching her. She seemed untouched by the uglier side of fame, but multiple sclerosis was working quietly in the background. Funicello was reportedly diagnosed in the late 1980s and went public in 1992 after years of hiding symptoms because she worried how people would react. That choice tells you everything about old celebrity culture. Even pain had to stay presentable. As the disease progressed, it slowly took away the physical ease that had once been central to her image. She was not destroyed in one shocking collapse. She was worn down in public memory little by little, while remaining deeply loved by the fans who grew up with her. She died in 2013 at 70 from complications of multiple sclerosis after living with the disease for more than 25 years. The smile was real. So was the struggle that kept trying to erase it. Walt Disney himself had picked her for the original club. Darla Hood. She was the sweet face from Our Gang, the girl audiences remember from the Little Rascals years with the curls, songs, and bright childhood charm. She had already survived the hardest part, or so it seemed. She grew up, kept performing, and stayed connected to the memory that made people love her. Then came the part that still feels infuriating. In 1979, Hood underwent an appendectomy. What should have been routine turned catastrophic. According to later accounts and autopsy findings widely cited in her biographies, she contracted hepatitis from a contaminated transfusion linked to the operation, and the resulting complications led to heart failure. She was only 47. That is why her story lands differently. This was not the old Hollywood machine chewing up another child in plain sight. This was a woman who had already made it through child stardom, only to be taken by something that feels horribly preventable. The camera had once preserved her as the cheerful little girl everybody remembered. But off-screen ordinary medical care became the final turn in her story. Some tragedies are dramatic. Darla Hood's is painful because it sounds like it never should have happened. She had been a central girl in the series for years. Tommy Rettig. As Jeff Miller, he gave the famous Collie's early television years their emotional center, a decent kid, a family setting, a world that still felt safe before the next commercial break. Then childhood fame faded. Rettig struggled after acting, and like many former child stars, he had to build a second identity after the applause stopped. But unlike many of them, he actually did. He became active in the computer software world, and was respected there for real skill, not nostalgia. That is what makes his ending so sad. His life was not only decline, it included reinvention. It included proof that a child star could become something else. Then in 1996, Rettig died at 54 of natural causes, with reports identifying heart disease or heart failure as the cause. He had found another chapter, another use for his mind, another version of himself beyond old reruns. And then time closed on him anyway. He did not remain the boy from Lassie. But he also did not get nearly enough years to be the man he became. He had beaten hundreds of boys for the role. Anissa Jones. She was Buffy from Family Affair, the tiny girl with the dolls, the soft voice, and the kind of TV innocence that made America instantly protective. She became famous so young that adulthood almost seems missing from the story entirely. That is what makes it so cold. After the show ended, the image stayed, but the structure around her did not. By 1976, Jones was dead at 18. The coroner ruled her death accidental, caused by combined drug intoxication. She had barely crossed into adulthood before the story was over. There is a temptation to explain too much here to search for one dramatic answer, but the simplest version is already devastating. The child millions recognized from a cozy family sitcom died in a world that looked nothing like the one viewers associated with her. No warm ending, no graceful transition, no second act worth the name. Just a sudden stop. Buffy remained preserved in reruns, small and smiling forever. Anissa Jones did not get the time to grow into a public self beyond that image. Some child star tragedies feel long and visible. Hers feels like a life that vanished almost between cuts. She was still being seen as Buffy when her real life was already falling away from that picture. Billie Buckwheat Thomas. Even people who never knew his real name knew the character, the voice, the grin, the comic rhythm, the feeling that Buckwheat was part of childhood itself. But unlike many child stars, Thomas actually stepped away from Hollywood and built a quieter adult life. That matters. His story is not mainly about public collapse. It is about distance, dignity, and the strange fact that even escape does not guarantee safety. In 1980, just weeks after appearing at a major Our Gang reunion and receiving a deeply emotional standing ovation, Thomas died of a heart attack at 49. There is something almost unbearably sad about that timing. He had survived the industry, outlived the role that made him famous, and lived long enough to see people still care. Then fate arrived anyway, fast and unsentimental. He seemed for a moment like one of the rare ones who had made it through. That may be why his death hits so softly and so hard at the same time. Hollywood was no longer chasing him. His body was. Born William Thomas Jr., he carried that child image for the rest of his life. Heather O'Rourke. She was the little girl who said, "They're here," and turned one line in Poltergeist into a permanent piece of pop culture. She looked angelic, calm, almost unreal on screen, which made the terror around her feel even stronger. That was the image. But the real horror in her story was not supernatural. It was physical, hidden, and devastatingly real. In February 1988, Heather died at 12 after being rushed to a San Diego hospital. Hospital officials said the cause was septic shock, brought on by congenital intestinal stenosis, a severe bowel obstruction she apparently had from birth. Reports at the time noted that she had been complaining of symptoms that at first seemed closer to ordinary illness. That is what still shocks people. The danger inside her body did not look like the kind that ends a life in a day. Her mother later filed a wrongful death suit, arguing the condition should have been diagnosed earlier. However, people interpret the medical aftermath. The known fact remains brutal. A child, the public associated with movie horror, died from something no audience could see. The scariest scene in Heather O'Rourke's story was the one that never made it to the screen. She was only 12. Patty Duke. She was not just a child star. She was a phenomenon. She won an Academy Award as a teenager for playing Helen Keller in The Miracle Worker, then became one of the most recognizable young faces in American entertainment. Her talent was never the question. The pain behind it was. Duke later became one of the most important public voices discussing bipolar disorder, helping give language and dignity to a conversation that older Hollywood had often buried under shame or silence. That matters because her story is not only collapse, it is survival, naming the wound and trying to help other people live with theirs. Even so, hardship never fully left the frame. Her early life and career were marked by extreme pressure, personal turmoil, and years of emotional struggle. In 2016, Duke died at 69. Her representative said the cause was sepsis from a ruptured intestine. That final medical crisis closed a life that had already contained more pain than most audiences ever guessed when they first saw her as a gifted child. Patty Duke is the right ending for this list because she leaves behind more than tragedy. She leaves witness courage and the reminder that being wounded is not the same thing as being defeated. She later wrote and spoke openly about that diagnosis. These stars brought joy. That is why their endings hurt. The smiles were not fake. Neither was the suffering behind them. Maybe that is old Hollywood's hardest truth. Which story changes the way you see classic stardom the most now? Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and hit the bell for more untold stories.